On the night of April 4th, 1968, James Brown walked onto the stage of the Boston Garden. He was 34 years old. He was about to give the most important performance of his career, and he had been awake for 31 hours. 4 hours earlier, Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee. The concert had already been sold out for weeks. 14,000 people were expected. The mayor of Boston, Kevin White, had spent the afternoon trying to decide whether to cancel it. The streets of Boston, like the streets of cities across America, were already beginning to fill with people whose grief was becoming rage. Newark had burned the previous summer. Detroit had burned. Memphis had burned. If the Boston Garden concert was canceled, 14,000 people would spill into the streets, into a city already lit with grief. Kevin White made a decision. He called James Brown directly. He asked him to go on. James Brown did not hesitate. "I'll be there," he said. What happened in Boston Garden on the night of April 4th, 1968, is one of the most documented and least fully understood events in American cultural history. It is documented because the city of Boston made an extraordinary decision. They broadcast the concert live on local television so that people who stayed home to watch it would not be in the streets. It is understood, partially, because the broadcast exists, because historians have studied it, because participants have given accounts. What is less understood is what happened before James Brown walked on stage. He had driven from his hotel to the arena through streets that were already tense. He had arrived backstage. He had been briefed on the situation. The mayor was concerned, security was nervous, the crowd inside the arena was not the crowd of a normal concert. These were 14,000 people in grief, who had come because they had bought tickets weeks ago and didn't know what else to do tonight. James Brown's musical director, Byrd, who was with him that night, described the backstage scene. He said James was quiet, not the energized, expansive quiet of a man preparing to perform, a different kind of quiet. The quiet of a man who understood the weight of what was being asked. Byrd said James went to a corner of the backstage area and stood alone for about 10 minutes, not doing anything visible, just standing. Then he came back. He told Bobby, "I'm going to talk to them first." Bobby asked what he meant. "Before the music," James said. "I'm going to talk to them." He walked onto the stage. The 14,000 people in Boston Garden had been told about King's death through the arena's PA system. The response had been a sound that Byrd described as unlike any crowd sound he had ever heard. Not screaming, not crying. A kind of moan, collective and involuntary, the sound of something giving way. James walked to the microphone. He did not begin performing. He looked at the audience. "I know how you feel," he said. Not performing the knowledge, stating it. He talked to them for several minutes before the music started. He talked about King. He talked about what King had stood for. He talked about what the people in this arena could do, not tonight, not in the street, but in the days that followed, that would honor what King had been trying to build. Then the music started. Byrd described the performance that followed as the greatest thing he had ever witnessed James Brown do. Not technically, not commercially, humanly. James Brown stood on that stage and gave 14,000 grieving people something to do with what they were feeling. Not distraction, not escape, a container. Music as a container for grief. Grief that without the container might have gone into the streets and become something else. The concert lasted 3 hours. The streets of Boston stayed relatively calm. In a night when dozens of American cities burned, after the concert, Bobby Byrd found James backstage. He said James was sitting alone, not in the way of triumph, not with the energy of a successful performance, simply sitting. Bobby sat beside him. After a while, James said one thing. "I hope he knows," James said. Bobby didn't ask who he meant. "I hope he knows we didn't let it burn," James said. Bobby said he thought King would know. James nodded. They sat together for a while longer. Then James Brown got up. He went to his dressing room. He changed his clothes. He went home. The Boston concert has been studied by historians, sociologists, and musicians for more than 50 years. It has been cited as evidence of music's capacity to perform a civic function, as evidence of what a performer can do when they understand that the audience came for something beyond entertainment. James Brown understood this. He had understood it before he walked on stage. It is why he stood alone in a corner for 10 minutes before going out. He was not preparing a performance. He was preparing himself to give people something they needed, which is a different thing, and harder. James Brown was the hardest working man in show business. He said it himself. His audiences said it. His musicians said it. But on the night of April 4th, 1968, what he worked at was not the show. It was the room. And the room held, because he understood what it needed, and gave it. Without the music to provide a container, the grief has nowhere to go but the streets. James Brown gave it somewhere to go, for 3 hours, on the worst night in a city full of grief. He held it.